will go for it here. Jamie Moore's going to be taken out. He is. It's an unbelievable win for Ryan Rhodes, who becomes the European champion at 32 after a fantastic scrap. It really was that good, and Ryan Rhodes' fairy tale story goes on.
Down goes Fraser! Down goes Fraser! Down goes Fraser!
Should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield! What a warrior!
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened! It happened!
I can't believe it.
That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back, Castillo right, now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Ebb and flow. Corrales winning. Castillo's in struggle. Lead steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Richard Steele stopped the fight with 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duva go absolutely berserk.
Hello Boxing Asylum listeners, and welcome to another Punches from the Past, where we delve into the historical archives and talk about the fights that really mattered. I'm Steve Wellings, and for this special show I'm joined by Kurt Ward, David Lee and Mr. Andy Patterson. Don't forget you can find previous episodes of the show over on iTunes, Tumblr and directly through our Facebook page. We've already covered quite a few fights already, the two bouts between Oscar De La Hoya and Sugar Shane Mosley, Lennox Lewis, Vitaly Klitschko, and the Azuma Nelson Salvador Sanchez fight as well. But this week we're going to move away a little bit from the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles and New York and hot step across the water to the Bolton Arena, no less, where Jamie Moore clashed with Ryan Rhodes on October the 23rd, 2009. It was a European title defence for Moore, which doubled as a WBC light middleweight eliminator. Just looking through the career of Jamie Moore up to this point, I think it was fair to say that he was starting to get a little bit stagnant. We all knew about his talent and his potential, and he'd had a lot of wars at British title level, particularly the three fights, in fact, with Mike Jones, and then the Matthew Macklin fight was an absolute classic back in 2006 for the British title, real quality fight. And then Moore had moved up to fight Sebastian Lujan in a bit of a step-up fight under Frank Maloney Promotions in Altrincham. He'd gone back in with Andrew Facey, Kieran Healy over in Ireland, a bit of a cash in there pick-up where he got about 30 grand for winning the Irish title, and then good wins over Michel Piccirillo to win the vacant European title and defend it against Roman Zuman, who was a pretty decent fighter back then as well. But we think that Moore had started to stagnate by the time he got to the Rhodes fight. He'd sat a lot on the sidelines for a little bit too long, and maybe he should have got a shot at some kind of world title beforehand, but it was Sergio Martinez's WBC that this was an eliminator for, as he also defended the European title, as we said before. And for some of our younger listeners who might not be overly familiar with the career of his opponent, Sheffield's Ryan Rhodes in particular, I'm going to hand over to Dave Lee, who's going to give us a little bit of a brief background on the Spice Boy himself, a bit of a revelation from a young age at the British title level.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Rhodes was a funny one, wasn't he? I mean, he almost seemed to have two careers. I mean, like, he burst on the scene in '96 when he became the youngest British champion in something like 57 years at the age of 20. And he beat former world champion Paul Silky Jones. And as I said, the hype around him was unreal. And it was further highlighted when he won the Best Young Boxer at the Private Boxing Writers Annual Dinner Awards in '97. Just all around, he was given so many plaudits. As you said, he was given the moniker of the Spice Boy, which kind of alienated him from the so-called hardcores. But in fairness to him, like he was a good-looking bloke at the time, and I think Warren was trying to market him to a female fan base. A lot of the hype as well was helped by the fact that he was a product of the Winkelbank gym. And of course, Nassim Hamid boxed out of that gym, and this was during the height of Nasmania. So he definitely benefited, I think, from that Hamid link. But to be honest, despite all the hype around him around that time, I wasn't a believer in him. To me, he was unquestionably very talented, very naturally talented boxer, but he boxed like a man at times who was caught between styles almost. I think he was fundamentally a very solid boxer, but he tried to adopt the Ingle style, and I think he tried too hard to be flashy, and it didn't really work for him. Now, he did start off as a light middleweight, and he won the light middleweight title against the aforementioned Silky Jones. But he moved up the middleweight very quickly, and he rose up the WBO middleweight rankings even quicker. Now, he was definitely being fast-tracked to superstardom, but I thought at the time Warren was being over-ambitious with him. Around that timeline, I don't know if you remember, but Lonnie Bradley was the WBO middleweight champion. Now, anybody who remembers Lonnie Bradley will know that he was no slouch. He was a very, very good fighter. However, Bradley was forced to vacate the title due to a detached retina, which pretty much ended his career, unfortunately. So with that, Rhodes ended up getting matched with Otis Grant, who actually had controversially drawn with Bradley, and they were going to contest. Rhodes and Grant were going to contest the vacant WBO middleweight title in December of '97. They were actually due to fight on the big Full Monty show in Sheffield 2 months before, but the WBO, for one reason or another, didn't approve it. So they fought in December. Rhodes ended up losing on points, and despite the ridiculously close scorecards, Rhodes was given a lesson in that fight, absolute lesson. Grant won by a mile, and I think Rhodes' confidence took a massive dent after that. He rebounded afterward with some pretty futile wins, to be honest. But then he ran into Jason Matthews for the vacant interim WBO middleweight title, and Matthews absolutely smashed him to bits, stopping him in 2 rounds. With that, you thought that was the end of Rhodes. I mean, he toiled around the small hall scene for a few years, and there was murmurs of him making another big splash in the boxing scene again. I mean, I remember Ringside doing a piece on him around 2002, talking about, he was making a big comeback. But that was put to bed when Lee Blundell shockingly stopped Rhodes in 3 rounds, and that left Rhodes' careers in tatters. But then something strange happened. Rhodes got himself back into contention. I think he went on something like a 10-fight win streak. Excuse me. And he was offered a shot at Gary Lockett's WBU title on the undercard of the big Danny Williams-Matt Skelton rematch at the Millennium Stadium. Now, Rhodes lost, but it was a highly credible performance, and Rhodes actually came on. I think Rhodes was dropped early on, but he came on strong in the latter stages, caused a lot of problems for Lockett, and it proved there was still life in his boxing career. And he proved that shortly after when he stopped Gary Walcombe to regain the British light middleweight title he had first won 11 years before. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It was, as I said, a second career for Rhodes. A couple of more wins followed, and that earned him a shot at the European light middleweight title, held, of course, by Jamie Moore, and that's the fight we're going to take a look at today.
And I think as well, Dave, those couple of wins, I remember the defence after he beat Walcombe, who turned out to be not as good as Frank Maloney thought he was going to be. He absolutely battered Jamie Coyle on Satanta. I think it was our ITV. I don't know how Coyle lasted the distance. And then a very credible international, WBC international title win over Vincent Vuma, who was a reasonable enough South African. So a couple of solid wins there.
That's correct. I think the Vuma fight, was that on the undercard of Hay against Barrett or something? I think it was a Satanta show, wasn't it? So it might have been Hay and Monty Barrett. But yeah, it was a good win.
Andy, obviously, Dave's laid out the career of Rhodes there, from early promise to sort of getting himself back into contention, and he went on to have a good career afterwards, which we'll cover later. As for Moore, I've said before he went stagnant, and I think he did. But he was a really exciting fighter on the way up. I'm sure you enjoyed his fights on Sky. He won a few, he lost a few, but as we'll touch on later with the commentary, the Sky had really took to him, and they weren't afraid to put on shit shows in leisure centres, as Eddie Hearn says back then. But I mean, the atmosphere wasn't the greatest in this one, but it was decent enough. Moore really got Sky behind him at this time.
Yeah, he was reading the crystal wave. I mean, obviously the win against the Italian, was it Pecoraro for the vacant title, obviously kind of put him into kind of higher platform. He was always an exciting fighter to watch. Always come forward. You just wonder as well. I mean, well, we'll mention it just now, but he did mention after the fight that the weight was the issue. Uh, Just remind me again, actually, because I'm a wee bit kind of hazy. Pecoraro, did he not sit on that fight, or was he not offered that fight? Later on, because he was contemplating move up to middleweight, and then I think that fight came along, and he decided he was going to stay at 154. I don't blame him for trying to kind of cram himself into the weight, because as I understood it back then, European title fights were, pretty poppy basically. I think I'd heard, something like anything between 20 and 30,000 pounds or something like that for a defence. So it's no chump change, it would help you kind of pay off your mortgage. But yeah, exciting fighter. But as you say, I think Kurt will probably get onto it as well. That Sky were really on Moore's Jimmy Moore's nuts that night.
You are right, Andy, regarding after the Kieran Healy fight, whenever he picked up the payday in Dublin, he was off for not short of a year, about 9 or 10 months before he fought Piccirillo. I think he had some kind of problem, maybe it was an elbow problem or something, but there was definitely political machinations as well going on. Sorry, Kurt, if you want to jump in there and give your thoughts before the fight on either guy.
Yeah, well, there's already a lot has been said, but I mean, going into the fight, I know that Jamie Moore was obviously the favourite. I think Rhodes, like Dave said, I mean, he did have all the talent, but I think that style was definitely manufactured on him, and it wasn't. He thought he could perform in that style, and you've got to be so athletic to do that style. A lot of the fighters out of that gym were very athletic, and taking nothing away from him, he was a very talented guy, but I just don't think that style suited him, and he was trying to be more. It was pushed on him more, I think, than a lot of the others who it came a lot naturally for, especially with the success of Hamed. But yeah, I mean, someone like Jamie Moore, who, he was kept at that level for far too long, I think. Where someone like Ricky Hatton was kept at the WBU level and people crying out for him to get the big fight, and eventually it did come with like someone like Kostya. I think with Jamie Moore, he was after a title fight, and with his style, he was never going to have a long career. And it's surprising he had a career as long as he did, I think, because he was the type who came forward. He did a lot of good fights. He took a lot of punishment, and he was hurt. He hurt his other guy, and I just think that was a shame. I mean, in both of these guys' cases, Rhodes should have been at the weight below instead of spending a lot of his time at middleweight when he wasn't a middleweight. And I think Jamie Moore should have been just pushed a little bit more. And I think it's a credit to both guys that they fought each other when they did. I think in boxing they could have maybe swerved the fight, and both in today's boxing. I mean, I know this didn't take place that long ago, but now if you have two British guys now, you probably keep them separated and try and push them both into title shots, whereas these two fought each other, and it was a shame this fight couldn't have happened maybe a few years earlier, or then both of them could have had a rematch down the line or another big fight, but it happened, and you always felt the loser was probably going to be at the end of their career, whoever that was. And going into the fight, you'd have to say Moore was obviously a big favourite, and Sky were really behind him, and I think Sky were just looking forward to seeing him win this fight and getting the title shot that he probably deserved for all the tough fights he's had over his career.
In the actual fight itself, like I said, the atmosphere in the Bolton Arena was funny. I remember Adam Smith said something at the beginning like, the crowd are going to go wild here, and it really was a little bit of a trickle, like a little bit of applause, and the atmosphere really wasn't that good. But I suppose if you're in the arena and you're enjoying these type of fights, you would have maybe got more out of it. But from home, it didn't sound like the sort of product that Eddie's putting on at the moment. But this was a proper fight. I mean, both guys just completely came at each other from early on. And even though Jim Watt seemed to think that Ryan Rhodes was, I wouldn't say taking a beating, but they definitely thought Moore was getting the better of him early on. I thought that Rhodes was doing okay. He was switch hitting. His movement wasn't too bad. He wasn't taking as many flush shots as they thought. And one observation I had actually, Andy, about Moore was, despite the fact that he fought with his hands up right by his head and his elbows tucked down, for someone who appeared to be defensively sound, given his posture and his style, he was taking quite a few shots from pretty much early on. He was quite basic, Moore. Is that unfair, or is that a fair enough statement?
No, I think it's fair enough. I mean, as you say, Jim Watt it's like he always does. He goes with this. He thinks of something, goes with the narrative, and just sticks with it. I think Rhodes basically says, in the first round it was to kind of box and move, and he kind of realised the amount of pressure that Moore was putting on him. He just couldn't move, and box, for that length of period for 12 rounds. But was he 32, 2 years older than Moore? He even had the more fights. So, I would probably say that even Rhodes, he boxed pretty well on the back foot. Round 3, I thought he was kind of like, because of Moore's pressure, he was having to kind of like do it on the back foot, tuck up, roll out the distance and that. But he was taking some flush shots. Moore just kept the pressure up going. But I sort of often wonder if Moore was really tight at the weight. Surprised he just didn't kind of really try and feel his way into the fight, kind of, just judge his gas tank, because as the fight gradually wore on, you could just see it kind of like eking out of him. But as I said, the pressure, the non-stop pressure on Rhodes, you just kind of thought to yourself, okay, you need to change it up. And he did. He stood in the pocket with him. He rolled with shots, he parried some shots, he caught some shots. I don't ever think that Moore was throwing was actually landing, but if you could see it, potentially the harder shots were definitely getting landed by Moore, especially over the duration of the fight.
He's starting to plant a couple on Ryan Rhodes, and there's one to the head, and he's shaken here a little, Ryan Rhodes, and he's been taken out in 3 before by Lee Blundell. Can Moore capitalise?
I think Moore went after him because he just didn't think that Rhodes could take what he was going to dish out. I mean, obviously we've mentioned that Rhodes was knocked out, and a couple of times before that, by pretty much guys he shouldn't have been knocked out by. And I think Moore just felt he was the bigger, the powerful guy, and he was just going to put it on him. And he did look like he was having success. Obviously he was landing to the head a lot, but I thought Rhodes really took the shots well, and I didn't think for the first few rounds especially he didn't seem bothered at all by the power and was standing in the pocket even when he was getting moaned at by Dave Caldwell. But he seems to take the power really well, and it was Moore, I felt, who was the one who didn't take the shots as well, and it was Rhodes who looked the bigger puncher to me out of the two.
Yeah, I mean, I got the impression as well that, I give Moore the first 4 rounds based on just his relentlessness and his aggression, but I don't know, it seemed to me he was almost forcing his work in this fight. He kind of had the look of a guy, to me. Steve mentioned all the tough battles he'd been in against the likes of course, Macklin, the fights with Jones and Facey and all those type of guys.
Ozzy Duran.
He looked like Ozzy Duran as well. He had the look of a guy who had gone to the well one too many times almost.
As you say, I think it was the first 4 rounds pretty much Moore, I wouldn't say bossed it, but definitely, if you look at the fight in itself, you would think that because Rhodes was backing up, he was basically like, getting basically hammered. But if you look at it going into the 5th, Moore was really, really blown heavily, and I just don't think the steam or even the snap was there in his punches anymore. And I think that's, did they even revert to even landing a low blow at one point on Rhodes?
Yeah, that was actually funny, Andy, because he landed a low blow in the 5th round, but actually it was Rhodes who was spurred on from that. And Moore seemed to lack, as you say, seemed to lack a bit of zip, bit of energy. I don't know.
Because he was holding Moore off actually midway through that 5th round after, as you say, he got back up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as I said, I think he may have just, as we said, he stayed. I think he stayed at that level for so long, became stagnant, and he was in so many tough fights as well. I think it all caught up with him on this night.
Just the thing is, he's probably just thinking that because he's a bigger light middleweight or whatever it is, and he's seen the likes, as you say, the 2 fights at middleweight getting basically evaporated. As we mentioned there, just before we actually went live, the guy was at Brundell, massive weight difference against the guy. Obviously you could just see that Rhodes was probably a career light middleweight, so maybe, as you say, Moore went in there, I think he could blast him out early doors, being the older man, and he just, the pistons just went.
And I think confidence played a large part as well. Like I said, I felt he could really put it on Rhodes and really, maybe he felt he didn't have the heart, he didn't have the chin, he didn't have the stomach for the fight at that stage. And I think after the first 4 rounds, I think at the end of the 4th, Rhodes hurt him, or he definitely had a good last 30 seconds. And I think after that, it changed. I think Moore realised, shit, this is going to be a hard fight, and maybe he didn't have much left in him. And Rhodes, I think he seemed to gain confidence and realised, I can take his stuff.
Yeah.
He can't take mine. And that's, if you noticed, there was a bit of a swag around Ryan Rhodes in the next round, and he played that Ingle style a lot more in the next round. And then, he seemed to go back and forth, but it seemed to be like, it just looked like Jamie Moore was at the end of his career. Take nothing away from Ryan Rhodes, because both guys going in, this was basically a career ender to the loser, and he just seemed after 3 or 4 rounds he hadn't got Rhodes out of there. He hadn't really hurt Rhodes at all, and Rhodes was sitting there, and he just looked like he had more fight left in him at that point. And I think Moore, he knew then he just had to go off broke. I don't think he felt comfortable going like that. He could go the 12 rounds either at that pace.
Round 6 was fantastic though, wasn't it?
Yeah, round 6 was fantastic. But just to go back to Kurt's point there on the fourth round, I mean, I give the fourth to Moore for his overall work, but I think it was a very crucial point right at the end where Moore was backed up.
Right hand.
Right hand, yeah. And it was very crucial because I think at that point Rhodes knew he had the power to not only back Moore up, but also hurt him. And as Kurt mentioned, his confidence after that, or Rhodes' confidence rather, was sky high.
Jamie Moore said beforehand that Ryan Rhodes doesn't believe he can win this fight deep down. Well, that's psychology, but they know each other well, these two. Good friends. But good friends and giving us this. Great stuff. Better from Rhodes. And Moore is just backed up for the first time at the end of the fourth.
Moore was hurt with a punch just before that little exchange. Rhodes sensed it and stepped in. Tremendous action this is.
Yeah, ended the fourth,
Yeah, I was going to make that same point, Andy, actually, as well. I think it was the end of the fourth, he came back at him, and then in the fifth, Moore was starting to flag a little bit, and I actually made a note. Jim Watt said,
well, a lot more confidence in Ryan Rhodes' work in this round. It's not as though he's not just making up the numbers, he's not just showing us how brave he is. It's as though he believes that he can win this.
Which was a bit of an overstatement. I don't think he particularly was making up the numbers, but that was Jim's way of saying that Moore was starting to flag and Rhodes was starting to come into it now. He was starting to box his way into it. And I think the thing was with Moore, you mentioned it, guys, sometimes a boxer has to go to the well one time too many. Moore had gone to the well against Michael Jones to beat him in one of their 3 fights. He'd gone to the well against Macklin. And guys these days are fighting for world titles against people who are worse than Jones, who are worse than Macklin. Moore as well had to dominate Michel Pichirillo. Again, there's guys here having world title fights nowadays who aren't fighting guys as good as Pichirillo. So Moore had gone to the well so many times. It was the same when Paul McCloskey beat Brady Prescott, and against Corley, he just couldn't go there again. And I think that was it. Moore just couldn't drag that one final performance out of himself, which is obvious considering the wars he'd had, because I think he felt that Rhodes wouldn't be able to stand up to it. And when Rhodes did stand up to it, Moore just couldn't physically, mentally, maybe a bit of both, just fight back. That's no shame. That's not to Moore's detriment at all. But maybe managerially and promotionally, they could have manoeuvred him into that world title shot or whatever. But yeah, definitely, I thought he was starting to flag around that 6th round. And then, of course, in the 7th round, guys, we all know what happened.
Yeah.
The big one came out of the blue.
Yeah, well, you see, I think that was Moore final last trip to the well, because that was a hellacious fucking right hand. If you look at the jab actually that Moore threw and the way that Rhodes rolled to the right, it was enough just to kind of square Moore up, and he just chinned him with a sweet right hand.
But is it up and a right hand for Ryan Rhodes? Down goes Jamie Moore. Big knockdown, and early in the 7th, can he recover from this? 7th time he's hit the deck through his career. He's normally found a way back, but that was a heavy fall, and Ryan Rhodes stands on the brink of his biggest ever win.
It was a delayed reaction, falls into the ropes and stuff, and you're saying to yourself, right, that's it, Rhodes is going to get on top of him here. What happens? Moore just comes back, and at one point it did look like that Moore had actually got his legs back under him, and his head was clear at one point, but Rhodes, I thought he was pretty educated going in there for that kill, and he just bided his time. It could have turned out badly for him, but at the same time, as if you drop a guy like that, usually it's going to take a wee bit longer to recover. And usually that was probably his last big effort from Moore, because if you saw him after that, actually, he just didn't have him in him. And
it was the last hurrah, Andy, wasn't it? That last little rally from Moore. And after that, I mean, he actually, if you look at it again, he actually gave Rhodes a free shot almost, didn't he? That right to the temple, which sent Moore stumbling back.
He was just standing there, Dave, wasn't he? Square on, like he didn't really know what to do in time.
He was spent, Kurt, and he just basically said, it was like he was saying, come on, finish me off, kind of a thing. I mean, he had nothing left.
I think it just the fight showed that Ryan Rhodes just had more wrinkles to his game. I mean, Jamie Moore really only had one way of fighting, and once Rhodes could deal with that, what was his plan B? What else could he do? There was nothing else he could really do. So he just had to hope that him implying pressure, coming forward, being big and strong, would break Rhodes down. And I could see why people thought he would be able to do that. Going by the history. But you got to remember, that was a higher weight, and Rhodes obviously wasn't suited to that weight. And in this fight, he could do more things. He could stand in the pocket and fight, and he could go on the run and do the Ingle star, move about, switch stances. He could change it all up. And you got to say, full credit to both guys because they took some big shots. But Jamie Moore, when he got caught with that right hand, a lot of guys would have just said, fuck this, I'm staying down. But he got up, and not only did he get up, he thought, I've only got one last chance. I'm just gonna, in desperation, I'm just gonna swing and try. I can only win now by hurting this guy and stopping him. And he went all out, and he was doing really well until he seemed to have nothing left again after a big rally, and then Rhodes just picked him off with a really nice, overhand right hand that just knocked everything out of him.
I thought it was interesting that I was watching retrospectively, obviously, as we all are, but the performance of Oliver Harrison in the corner, knowing the way Murray went into the later fight against Golovkin, and a lot of people were quite critical of him for not pulling him out. There was no real sort of danger of the tail coming in or Harrison. He seems like a fairly brave corner man. I think this was another reiteration of that point. There was no chance they were going to jump in and pull him out of there. Or anybody have any comments on the Oliver Harrison situation? Nobody cares as much as me about this, obviously. And what about the opposite corner then? Ryan Rose, Dave Caldwell in the corner. He seems to got he's got a few big jobs now. David Price, Tony Bellew, Caldwell, former product of the Ingle gym. Maybe he was a better trainer for Rhodes, as you said, Andy, than the Ingles. Or was it Dave Lee? So I think you're saying about the way Rhodes was sort of stuck between two styles. But I actually agree with Dave's point there. I think that maybe they were trying to mould him into an Ingle fighter where he was maybe better whenever he was orthodox boxing. He was certainly better, I thought, mostly orthodox in this fight. But it was a tale of two corners, really. But I just did notice that about Harrison. And Caldwell's turned out to be a good little trainer as well. But, I mean, unless anybody has anything to say about that, we can obviously look at the fight afterwards. I'll just give my 2 pence worth on Moore for a start. Had one fight, Sergei Kamitsky on the David Hay, John Ruiz undercard, and he was gone by then. There was nothing left for Moore. I think I just remember him with a resigned look on his face, just sitting on the stool, the towel on the back of his neck, and he just knew he hadn't got it anymore. And he retired. He got out of there 6 years ago when he needed to, I think.
Was there no word as well about a failed brain scan, or was that an issue with a scan that he had?
I don't remember that unless the guys recall anything about that.
No, I mean, there was like rumblings of him making a comeback, wasn't there? I mean, I know he mentioned it on Twitter a few times. He said that kind of like desire to come back and right a few wrongs in his career. But obviously, what happened to him then kind of unfortunately put paid to that. But against Kamitsky, he looked like a fighter who had just nothing left in the tank, didn't he? It's a real shame as well. I mean, when Moore was flying high, I'm talking about when he was beating Macklin, beating Sebastian Ruan, and those type of guys. I mean, I'm trying to remember my kind of like my time period, making sure I'm getting it right here. But I mean, at the same time, you had guys like Corey Spinks and Cornelius Canine Bunridge and Verno Phillips trading belts left, right, and centre. I mean, don't tell me Moore couldn't have mixed with those guys. I mean, he could have.
Yeah, I think there's got to be questions asked to Frank Maloney, to be honest with you. I think we've seen it in a few different careers. Martin Lindsay's career as well, the way he was left to stagnate at British title level for so long, was never even pushed onto European title level, and ended up Rendell Munro as well. He went on for ages and ages before he got the shot in Japan. I think Frank, or Kelly as he's known in his latest incarnation, as well as he did for Lennox Lewis and that whole heavyweight product, I think he has a lot to answer for, to be honest with you, with the way he handles some of his other fighters.
Because I think Munro was actually offered the Cordoba fight. Now, I could be wrong, but obviously the Cordoba fight ended up going to Bernard Dunn. We all know what happened there. But I think Munro was offered that fight, and I think Maloney turned it down. So
I think from both guys though, it's a shame, and there's going to be like regret when they look back, because you're talking about Jane Moore, then he stagnated for too long, and he should have got a shot when momentum was there. And I think it's the same for Ryan Rhodes. I mean, this was a WBC eliminator. He won the fight. When did he get the WBC shot? 2 years later. I mean, against Canelo. I mean, that's a long time, especially when Rhodes went into that fight with most people thinking, this is it. He's not far off the end himself, and he was in a tough fight there, and he's in that kind of boxing limbo where he's waiting for this guy to give him the shot. The guy's, a Mexican guy who's got the power to basically dictate with the WBC. So Ryan Rhodes is there. He needs to fight to make money, but he doesn't want to have a high risk fight because if he loses, that's his shotgun. So he has to be in boxing limbo, fighting these guys like Luca Messi, Rocky Jr. Terrible fight. While he waits, and then when he finally gets the shot, it's 2 years down the line. I'm not saying he would have beat Canelo, before that, but he deserved his shot. Whether you agree with it or not, that was an eliminator. He deserved his shot, and being messed around for 2 years, we've seen it with a few other guys with the WBC over the years, and it's just sad that both guys really should have got the chance when the momentum was behind them. Things might have been different for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I hadn't even realised, Kurt, that in hindsight that he had been messed around for so long, but he really was left to wither just looking at his record there, like you say. I mean, it was a good long time, 8 or 9 months till he fought Messi in the defence of the European title. Then this junior who looks like it was a bit of a nondescript fight on a local show, and then eventually he gets the Alvarez fight. As you say, he doesn't want to take too many risks, but he really was left on the vine.
Yeah, it's the same thing happened with Jose Lusagan, if you remember. He won an eliminator. And he had to wait. I think he finally got a shot at Lucas Matisse, but it was about a year and a half later or 2 years later. He just got messed around because when one's a name and one isn't, they seem to be able to dictate. It's just, like I said, it's sad. Whatever you think of the rankings or, a guy wins the fight, he should be getting his fight. Not saying it has to happen 3 months later, but the next fight, in theory, should have been that fight, and he didn't get it. And I think he had to wait so long. And by the time he got to Alvarez, it was 2 years after that fight, and it's a long time to wait, especially when you're not fighting decent opposition, because you've got to make sure you get your shot, and that's how boxing works, unfortunately, for the lesser guys.
I'm sure that Rhodes once said after he beat Murat, he was happy to make a few European title defences just to kind of put a few quid in the bank. But if I remember rightly, actually, as well, about the WBC situation was, I'm sure Sergio Martinez was interim champion around about this time, around about the Moore fight, and he'd been up and waiting for, was it Paul Williams the first time? And that basically vacated the title up for, I'm right in saying that it was Canelo then went in and fought for the title. Because I think Chavez was running about there at that time as well, but he went up the middleweight.
This is the thing. I mean, he beats more and he has to wait, or he chooses to wait. I mean, I'm sure if he'd been offered the fight, a big fight, he would have took it though after that. But then Canelo wins it against Matthew Hatton. I mean, it makes no sense really, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. I've just brought the record up. That's right. He'd beaten Cintron for the interim, moved up for Williams, and then went on to fight Pavlik and then the Williams rematch. I wonder how... It would have been a big ask, wouldn't it, if Moore had got the shot at Martinez, which was talked about. If he'd have managed to get through Rhodes, given what we know now, he would have had a lot of miles on the clock, and it would have been too much.
That's Pete Martinez at that time, mate. Or close to it, anyway.
Yeah.
The movement, the speed and power, you say, I don't even think that, obviously they both were southpaws, but I just think that, his elusiveness would have been too much for me. I mean, okay, the pressure and that, but I just think athleticism and the fact there's a fight would probably mean at 154, Moore probably still struggling with the weight. Even though he says no excuses, no sour grapes after the fight and stuff like that, but, I think it would have been too much.
And
definitely would have been too much.
With Moore now working on Sky, alongside Matchroom, he must be sat there thinking, I wish I was around now, because, even if he wouldn't be a world champion, he could be someone like Martin Murray, who has like 3 or 4 title shots, goes around the world facing the top guys. No shame in facing the top guys and losing. Maybe Moore wouldn't have been good enough to be a world champion or be the best in the division, but, he's a guy who deserved a shot, and for one reason or another, he just never got it, and he had to stay around that kind of level for too long. And by the time he got to fight Rhodes, for even if he beat Rhodes, he would have been in the same position. Another 2 years waiting. I mean, what chance would he have had by that point anyway? So it's just a shame how it works out.
I think my final comments will be a great fight between two great warriors. Rhodes really pulled it out the bag. Moore, we know he was shop worn by that point, but it really was an awesome fight for as long as it lasted, and those are the type of fights that we all enjoyed. It was only 7 years ago. It feels like a lifetime away.
It does, and the thing is, you've got to remember as well, isn't it great to see a fight on Sky between two top fighters giving it their all? No pay-per-view, no bullshit, no, Johnny Nelson talking shit for an hour, and no all having to build it up. You just know that these two guys are going to, they're going to give everything, and, the winner will move on, and that's it. And, you don't need no pay-per-view or no stupid, interviews all week. You just get on with it, and, we don't see enough of that now. But to anyone who ain't seen it, I mean, yeah, more Rhodes, great fight. You could, try and find many of Moore's fights because, he put it on the line every time. Obviously, he's fighting Macklin. He's, everyone knows about that. So
Classic, yeah.
it's just, a fighter who, really, he probably wasn't good enough to be the top guy, but he had the heart of, to go out there and, really put it all on the line. And as we said about this fight, when he was hurt and when he was down, a lesser guy would have just stood there and took the count, but he didn't. He got up and he gave it one last go to, he gave everything he had, and he just wasn't good enough on that night. And, Rhodes was excellent, and he deserved the win.
Final question. Question anyway. Would you still say that Macklin Moore was a far better fight?
Yes.
Yeah, overall, yeah.
Final word, Dave?
I just want to say, Steve, you mentioned that it was a small hall classic, bit of a strange atmosphere, and you mentioned Eddie Hearn sneering at the leisure centre days, but then you look at fights like Anthony Joshua and Gary Cornish selling out almost instantly the O2 Arena. I mean, what fight would you rather watch?
A sobering note from Dave Lee, I think, to wrap us up there, guys. We'll call it a day for this one. That was Dave Lee on the line with me, Steve Wellings, Andy Patterson and Kurt Ward. Don't forget to go and look back at our previous editions as well, guys, and go and look up this fight on YouTube if you haven't seen it before, or maybe it's been a few years like it was for me and the guys. It really is worth watching. Many of Moore and also Rhodes fights as well are worth seeking out. And don't forget to tune in to YouTube on Sunday for the main Boxing Asylum Nuthouse podcast. And next week, we're going to have a really big fight for you. So keep an ear out for that. I think you'll enjoy this one. Thanks, guys. We'll speak to you soon.